Before I begin, I'd like to say that just because a market is in aggregate overpriced or overvalued doesn't mean that you can't find wonderful bargains within it. So just like the stock market in aggregate right now is overpriced, there are still some wonderful businesses trading at very, very reasonable prices. Same can probably be said for real estate. So there are going to be exceptions to this, but I'm talking about in aggregate, markets are very, very expensive in Canada in terms of Canadian real estate, and it's going to become harder and harder as time goes on to find good bargains in Canadian real estate. So let's get into it. It may not only be the case that we have a real estate bubble in this country, but we also may have a realtor bubble in this country. According to Stats Can, there's 108,706 realtors registered in Canada at the moment, which is at an all-time high. To put that in context, there's one real estate agent for every 245 people over the age of 19, which is a ridiculous number, and it goes at least some way to explain why there's a commonly held belief in Canada right now that real estate is a wonderful investment. There's so many people around talking about it because their livelihood depends upon it. Now, even more worrying than the number of real estate agents going around talking about how great real estate is and how great real estate will always be no matter what happens is the number of jobs in the construction industry right now. So typically, or historically, it's been about 7% of the economy has been in construction jobs, and right now it's 13.5%, nearly double the historical average. So if we return to the norm, the historical norm, the job losses are going to be in the tens of thousands, which I think will devastate an already weakened economy. Our Canadian real estate continues to be the most expensive in the world compared to rents. I've gotten a few questions about this, so I'll just reiterate it here. So if you can buy property X and it costs you $3,000 a month to own that property, and you can rent property Y of a similar square footage and it costs you $1,000 a month, you're better off to rent than to buy. And the wider that gap gets from a financial perspective, the better off you are. We are at all-time highs in terms of the discrepancy between what it costs to rent and what it costs to buy. A little caveat, I'd say, from my own experience, I've recently gone through this, and I've actually, because I've come back from Thailand, I'm now renting for a little while until I think real estate drops in prices. And at least in the Greater Toronto area where I live, there's terrible rentals. The rental market is actually not that loose, it's pretty tight. What you can rent is pretty dumpy relative to what you can get if you buy. So keep that in mind if you're a renter. Another way that we measure real estate expensiveness or cheapness is to compare it to our annual incomes. And right now, Canada has the second most expensive real estate in the world compared to our annual incomes. So historically, we spend between 3 and 4 times our annual income on real estate. Right now, we're spending about 8 times annual income on real estate, which makes us the second most expensive place in the world, behind Belgium, I think. When I compared the graph looking at annual incomes and real estate prices in different economies, what jumped out at me is the fact that Japan is actually one of the most inexpensively priced real estate markets in the world at the moment. Now, if you consider that only 35 years ago, which is a very short time in the duration of real estate, Japan was one of the most expensive real estate markets, if not the most expensive real estate market in the world. So what we need to do is remind ourselves that what seems so permanent today changes oftentimes dramatically and radically. And so, as someone once said, all that's solid melts into air. So whatever we believe is true and going to be true for all time with a particular asset class, I'd remind you that Japanese real estate at one point was considered to be the most expensive stuff in the world, and now it's really, really cheap. We once considered technology stocks to be the be-all and end-all, and they crashed and burned. And so this is a recurring theme in economic history, and I'd like to remind you that you should keep that in mind when thinking about Canadian real estate. And apparently right now the average selling price for a house in Canada is $416,000. Notice I didn't say that's what it's worth, I said that's what it's priced at right now. And the question arises, in my mind at least, I'm going to wonder how many people are either going to be willing to or able to afford an average price of $416,000, especially given that we have 7% plus unemployment in the country. It may be because of how real estate figures in the popular imagination. Many people may want to buy real estate, but at an average price of $416,000, they may not be able to buy real estate. And the popular imagination has loved things like baseball cards, Beanie Babies, tech stocks, and all sorts of things in the past. Just because the popular imagination wants to do it doesn't mean it's in everybody's best interest to do it. Add to this toxic mixture of average real estate prices of $416,000 plus unemployment rates of 7%. Personal debt levels are at all-time highs. They remain at all-time highs. Not much has changed in the last 7 months since we did our first video about this. They're now about 163% of disposable income. So for every dollar of disposable income Canadians have on an annual basis, they have $1.63 of debt. More worrying still, at least to me, is the fact that non-mortgage debt now represents a huge amount of money, just shy of $24,000 on average. So it begs the question then, if we're so tapped out and we are collectively becoming more and more unemployed and house prices are rising and rising and rising, how long can this particular game go on? So what's the message? The message is that Canadian real estate is overpriced. Does that mean that all Canadian real estate is overpriced? No, you can still probably find good value in it occasionally, in the same way that you can find good value in the stock market at the moment, even though the stock market might be overpriced. So don't believe the hype. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. Don't believe that prices are always going to go up because of immigration or because of the lack of single-family homes in Toronto or because of international investors or because they're running out of land, or any of these other silly arguments or reasons you hear from real estate agents who are acting in their interest and not necessarily yours. So what you want to do is you want to control that which you can control. And the things you can control are the price you are willing to pay and the time that you buy. And that's it. So just keep your eye on those things. Don't overpay, and understand that just because things have risen a lot in price in the recent past doesn't mean they're going to continue to do so. Thank you very much as usual, and I look forward to questions and comments.